Indeed, privacy, that is the question. And what is the definition of privacy in this internet age? Well, let's discuss this now. Zeynep Tufekci is an Associate Professor of Information and Library Science at the University of North Carolina, and Rebecca McKinnon is the Director of the Ranking Digital Rights Project, the New America Foundation's Open Technology Institute. It's nice to have both of you on the program. Rebecca, I want to begin with you and just get your sense. We heard from Mark Zuckerberg there. What was your assessment of his testimony?
Well, Stan, you know, he had very well prepared talking points. And one of the things he kept repeating over and over again is that Facebook is very transparent. We give people total control over their information. There may be controls, there are controls over what, you know, when you post things on Facebook, obviously you can choose what to post and you can choose who that gets shared with. But there are all kinds of other ways that Facebook is collecting information about people's activities, not just on Facebook and where they're connecting from and where they're clicking to, but also what other web pages they're visiting across the internet and across their devices. And these things are being tracked. And you do not have full control over what's collected there, and you can opt out of some things, but not out of everything, and it's not opt-in. So you know, there was a lot of spin going on there.
Zeynep, you had written ahead of these hearings that what should the senators ask Mark Zuckerberg? You said absolutely nothing. Was there nothing really to be gained from this?
Well, there is something to be gained, but as Rebecca said, he came with prepared remarks, and the format, 4 minutes per senator, wasn't conducive to explanation. The reason I wrote that is that it's time to act, right? Sort of having Zuckerberg sit there is a good democratic exercise, but he's been apologizing for 15 years for repeated breaches of user trust, privacy issues in the United States. He's under a federal consent decree, the company is, because of deceptive privacy practices. And this has been, he says that Facebook is an idealistic company. I'm not going to judge what's in his heart, but Facebook is a $500 billion market capitalization company whose business model is to collect an enormous amount of data that you do not have control over how it's collected. You may have a little bit of control over what you voluntarily post, but as Rebecca said, that's the tip of the iceberg, and whose business model is then to use that data to profile you, that extensive surveillance, and sell your attention. So we're being sold, and that part is where we need oversight and controls. That's why I want questions, but more than that, I want action.
Zeynep, I'll just follow up with you on that. Are you effectively saying here, because you've heard the apologies before, we heard now an admission that they weren't as responsible as they should have been, and also a concession that some regulation is inevitable, but do you really not put much stock in that you think he's just going through the motions?
As long as the business model structure of collecting extensive data is not limited somehow, I don't see how they're voluntarily going to limit it too much, because that's the whole way they make money. But if there's now European regulations that are going to put some limits on that, but we need a lot more than that. We really need people to be able to say, I do not want to be tracked. I do not want to be targeted that way. And we want companies like Facebook to find alternative technologies and business models, so we are not creating this enormous surveillance machine.
Rebecca, that thing goes to the point of the very existence of Facebook and the business model, regulations that would be completely not in the interest of the company. Is that likely?
Well, you know, targeted advertising is basically the fossil fuel of the information ecosystem that Facebook is really driving. And I think what we really need here is to think about how are Facebook and some other companies primarily making their profits, and is that business model even compatible with human rights and democracy and the kind of society we want to have? Just as fossil fuels are an existential threat to the environment, is the target advertising model an existential threat get to the kind of society we want to have. And if that is the case, then with regulation, with technical innovation, both Facebook, but the entire ecosystem of companies that are reliant on targeted advertising for their profits need to be incentivized either with sticks or with carrots to move towards other business models.
Rebecca, you raised something I think which is absolutely essential to this when you said, what type of society do we want to have? Let me put this to you. Is the society we want to have the society that we have right now? It is, in fact, the Facebook society.
That's right. That's right. And Facebook, because of its business model, the way in which content is displayed to you, the way in which content is prioritized, it's all about what you're going to engage with the most, so that it's most, basically it maximizes your intention and engagement, so advertisers can maximize the value, and the information that's collected and shared and given to advertisers for profiling also is that makes it more likely that we have situations like Cambridge Analytica, that basically the platform is designed for information warfare and propaganda campaigns. That's the society we're in now, in which information warfare and propaganda campaigns are increasingly the norm, but can democracy survive it?
Zainab, that is the question. When democracy itself is potentially complicit in this, that yes, we see Facebook manipulated and the allegations of Russia manipulating it for the US elections, but we know that political parties and individuals, you factor this in anyway, they use it. So we are all part of the same internet ecosystem.
We are, but I want to build on what Rebecca said. Just like with, if oil is really cheap or if like dirty technologies that pollute are really cheap, nobody's going to develop alternatives. If we bring in regulation, oversight, industry self-regulation, then maybe we can have the green technologies of the digital age, right? There are ways in which we can have the digital conveniences without having platforms whose business model is so compatible with misinformation and with these privacy breaches. And I want to say, even if you're not on Facebook, Facebook is building shadow profiles of people who are not by, harvesting people's contacts and collecting information across the web with tracking pixels. So just saying I'm not going to be on Facebook is not good enough. When 2 billion people are on it, it has an effect on everyone. And even if you're not on it, you're being tracked. So it's time. This is a young technology. We need to change tracks as soon as possible to have the good stuff without all these downsides.
But here's the thing, Zainab, and this may be a very cynical question, but do people care? Has the threshold of privacy diminished to such an extent? They should, but I'm saying, do they? When you talk about opt-in or people paying extra for greater control over their information, for greater privacy protocols, are people going to do it? Does privacy matter as much in this age?
Well, obviously, we should educate people. Number two, you're already paying for it. The advertisements, when you buy a can of Coca-Cola, the price includes the ads. So as a society, we're already paying for this, so we might as well take that out and do it directly. And look, we don't have lead in our paint anymore. We have emission controls. Cars have seat belts. It used to be in large cities around the world, industrialization, London, New York of the world, you couldn't breathe. We've cleaned that up. There are all sorts of ways in which in previous technologies, we had this phase where everything was the Wild West and there was this massive damage along with a lot of good. I'm not saying there's not a lot of good. And then we came in and said, you know what, we are not going to have lead in paint no matter how good it makes it in terms of sticking. We're not going to have asbestos in our buildings. It's the same thing. We need to act and say, we are going to change tracks. And it's the kind of thing that is such an obvious problem with a great deal of solutions that need to be explored.
Rebecca, all the things that Zainab is saying there are true, and that's the way previous industry had been regulated, but this is an industry unlike any other, isn't it? And when you're talking about government regulation there, regulating something that is driven by you and I, it is driven by ordinary people, and it is beyond the particular sovereignty of individual countries.
Well, it certainly is more complicated because you have, I sometimes call Facebook Facebookistan because it is sort of a private sovereignty. And if you regulate it in one country in a particular way, then that can have an impact on users around the world, which may sometimes be a good thing, as we're seeing with European privacy regulations that are coming out that are going to affect users everywhere. But you often do see a clash between what the companies want to achieve commercially and what governments want. And sometimes the companies are on the right side. You have many governments that are trying to censor a lot of political speech and are very angry with Facebook for not censoring the dissent and critiques that they don't want to be seen in their country. So there's a real back and forth, and as Zeynep said, there is quite a bit of good to be had from these global platforms, but at the same time, and I do think that our legislative processes aren't very well equipped at the moment to deal with these global platforms, and countries don't coordinate very well, which is also a problem. But I don't think it's insurmountable. I think we do have an awakening moment here.
It's not too late, Rebecca? You think
it's not too late. You know, again, it takes a lot of effort. Just as the transition from fossil fuels to alternative energy has taken tremendous amount of legislation, investment, private sector commitment, consumer advocacy, activism, and all kinds of things. But this has been a real wake-up moment, I think, where people realize that this affects their communities. That when disinformation campaigns, as they seem to have manipulated election outcomes, that affects people's lives. That affects whether they get health care. It affects whether you have all kinds of other things that you need in your life, and so I think people are starting to understand more the connection between what's happening in these online platforms and how these platforms are governing people's digital lives and the impact that has on their physical daily lives and their relationships with their governments, with their communities, with their companies. And that it's becoming much more tangible, and that's why I think we do have a moment to act. But we also need a lot of other players in the ecosystem acting responsibly.
Zeynep, one of the things that may ultimately bring about a change is the market itself and the future of the company. How much damage has been done after the Cambridge Analytica scandal, after the evidence today, or do you think that Facebook emerges unscathed? Is there enough commercial pressure and demand for regulation itself?
Well, the demand for regulation primarily comes from the fact, I think, besides other reasons, the fact that there is no market pressure. Mark Zuckerberg was asked, is delete Facebook a substantial number? No. Is the interaction gone down? No. Had the previous scandals caused usage to go down? No. The reason for that is once you have 2 billion people already on the platform, and once you have so many civic functions, when you have so many personal networks, when you have so many political activity already on the platform, you don't have an effective competitor. In fact, he was asked, who's your competitor? And he just kind of rolled his eyes, looked around and tried to find one and couldn't name a competitor. There is no market discipline on Facebook because of its size and scale. Makes it very hard. I use it daily. I have friends and family around the world with whom, due to literacy or cost, I cannot communicate really in practice any other way. I hear this all the time. I volunteer with some groups, all the activities announced on Facebook.
Yeah.
I know school districts that are on Facebook. In some countries, Facebook is the internet. This is not something that his stock price may have taken a bit of a beating, but that's going to go away. None of the previous crises affected the company's growth. At this point, unless there's some oversight and plus some action from the company, the market is not going to take care of this one.
Interesting what you're saying.
But it's early, as Rebecca said. The company is just 14 years old.
It is, but interesting what you say. In some countries, Facebook is the internet. And something else you said, you don't have to be on Facebook for Facebook to be in your life. Look, a great conversation. Zainab. Rebecca, good to see you again. Thank you again for joining us.
Great to see you.